You are watching George Schlackegg.
The one and only.
It was Sunday morning. I was awake early, not sure if I had actually slept for a significant while. It had been a very uncomfortable night, but it was done with. Well, my friends, this is Bicycle Touring Talk, episode 32. It's based on my book, Destinations Are Fake. Link in the description. On this Sunday morning, I was in Coatzacoalcos, where I had spent a day with my new friend Bonnie, who had invited me to sleep on a lawn chair on her porch. I left Bonnie's house after I was treated to some coffee and breakfast. I felt tired. The chair I had slept in had left me with a sore back, and I really hadn't slept well. It didn't keep me from leaving Coatzacoalcos right after saying goodbye to Bonnie and her folks. I had enjoyed my stay here, but there was nothing more for me here. I was still recovering from the disappointment about Muriel. What a letdown. Traffic was light, so it was a quick and easy ride out of the city. I had originally hoped to follow a secondary road away from the main highway, staying closer to the shore, but it turned out to be almost impossible without getting lost. According to the map, that road led to a little town, Agua Dulce. I had loosely envisioned it to be my destination for the day. Agua Dulce would have been just a bit off my route that way. I changed my mind when I reached the turnoff early in the afternoon. Why bother going 5 kilometers off my route when the same distance would take me right into the state of Tabasco if I followed the main road? Half an hour later, I was posing and taking pictures of myself by the big sign on the highway that indicated the border. I was entering a new stage of my tour, finally leaving the state of Veracruz behind. The first town in Tabasco was La Venta. It was also about 5 kilometers off the highway, in the same direction as Agua Dulce, toward the shore. Upon arrival, I found a tiny hotel on the outskirts of town, right next to a large industrial plant. The owner told me in an almost apologetic way that his hotel only had the bare necessities and catered primarily to the workers of the plant next door. I told him that as long as he had a room available, I didn't care how simple it was, as long as it was clean. He assured me that all rooms were attended to daily. So I checked in. It turned out the room was better than many I had slept in during my tour so far. The rate was around $12. There was a small TV that could receive 2 channels, but there was no internet. I was tired from a lack of sleep and riding in the heat. So, without having planned for it, I ended up taking a nap while it was still broad daylight outside. The room was hot and sticky. A dusty old ceiling fan provided just enough air circulation to make it bearable. When I woke up, an hour later, I was drenched in sweat. The sunlight outside was slowly fading. It would have to be cooler outside now than in my room. I was thirsty and somewhat hungry too. There had to be a good place in town to take care of those needs. It was only a 5-minute walk to the town center, and there I had the choice between several restaurants. The one I picked turned out to be great, like most mom-and-pop eateries in small-town Mexico. After stuffing myself with chicken, rice, salad, and tortillas, besides a big jug of water, I was almost too full to walk. The sun had completely set by now, and there was just a little bit of daylight left. Across the street, I saw a sign that said, Café Internet. The light shining through the windows revealed that it was open. I walked in and was greeted by a girl behind a counter. "They'd be open for another hour," she told me. For 10 pesos, I could use one of the terminals. It sounded good, so I took her up on it. The first thing I noticed when I sat down and logged into my email was a message from none other than Muriel. Wow, now she's getting in touch, I thought. Of course, I had left Coatzacoalcos behind hours ago, so whatever was in that email was irrelevant at this point. Or was it? When I opened the message, I almost fell off my chair because it was so funny. This woman actually suggested that we'd meet at some park within a few blocks of my hotel at around 7 that night. I looked at the time. She'd be there waiting for me. Perhaps she had figured there was no point because I had not responded. It didn't matter. While I had enjoyed meeting her, she certainly wasn't worth having some angry husband come after me. I sent a reply anyways, explaining that I had already left town and that I knew she was married. I thought this was going to be the end of the story. Almost half an hour had passed by the time I finally read up a bit on La Venta. An article on Wikipedia revealed that this area had once been the center of the Olmeca culture. There was a huge archaeological area within the town. I made the decision to check it out the next morning. Since I had no plan to stay in La Venta, I got up fairly early the next day, a Monday. The town was busy already. I had no trouble finding a place to have breakfast. My checkout time at the hotel was only at 1, but I was planning to hit the road way before that. I walked to the archaeological site right after finishing up my coffee and huevos a la mexicana. It cost a few pesos admission, but seemed well worth it. Besides pyramids and ancient sculptures, there was a museum with many artifacts that were over 2,000 years old. What amazed me even more were the professional guides. 2 young boys who could not have been much older than 10 offered their services for 50 pesos. It seemed like a good deal and turned out to be just that. The boys knew their stuff. About an hour later, I was on my way out of the museum, still mesmerized by the idea of an ancient civilization that had once inhabited this area, when I saw a familiar figure walk through the gate. There was Anna, the woman from Sweden. She was still wearing the same cycling outfit. With her was a local family who had accommodated her for the night. Now they were all going to check out the pyramids together. We said hello and talked for a while. Anna had stayed in Catemaco for a couple of nights, but had skipped right through Coatzacoalcos. Once again we parted ways, thinking we'd probably bump into each other once again. I left the hotel less than half an hour later. My destination for the day was Cardenas, a small city about 80 kilometers away. I had to pick between Route 180 and a toll road, Route 1800. It was more out of curiosity that I took the scenic route, but in this case it turned out to be a good choice. Traffic was light and the road took me through some untouched wilderness. It was eventually going to meet up with the toll road again anyway, leaving my options open. Just in time for lunch, I found a restaurant at the side of the road that looked both inviting and inexpensive. It was an easy decision to stop. The daily special was empanadas de pollo, a typical Mexican dish with chicken and corn as the main ingredients, topped up with plenty of veggies and salad. I washed it all down with some Coke and lots of cold water. Once again, the restaurant staff took great interest in my tour and even supplied me with some fresh oranges free of charge for the road. Cardenas was still a good distance away, but soon I ended up on the toll road, which allowed me to cover a lot of distance in a relatively short time due to a strong tailwind and the wide, smooth shoulder to ride on. Cardenas was a beautiful city. I found my way to the central square and a hotel by the name Hotel Yaxol pretty quickly. When I asked for a low-priced room, I was offered a special deal for 160 pesos a night. The hotel was undergoing renovations, but some of the rooms had not been done yet, so they were cheaper. I got what I paid for. The room was alright, but the walls were dirty and the furniture was barely holding together. There was no TV nor internet. It was fine by me because the city was so interesting that I didn't want to spend time in my room anyway. I went exploring for most of the evening and found a great place to eat. After supper, I walked into a store to pick up a can of beer. A young man who looked like a tourist himself approached me and began a conversation in English. It turned out he was the owner of a hostel in Campeche. Of course, he recognized me as a traveler right off the bat and tried to pitch for his enterprise. Once he understood that I was touring the entire country by bicycle, he readily offered me a free stay.
We would love to have you stay at our place, as it would be great for promotional purposes.
Wow, I'm a celebrity. I took his card and thanked him, without promising to stay at his hostel, but I was going to check it out once I reached Campeche in a few days. I walked back to my hotel and settled down, falling asleep quickly. There's nothing like daily long bike rides to ensure quality sleep. The next morning, I wandered around town some more before and after breakfast. It was almost tempting to stay in Cardenas another day, but in the end I decided to move on. Cardenas was a sort of crossroads for me. The options were to either keep following Route 180 into Villahermosa, Tabasco's largest city, or to follow Route 187 back to the coast. A lot of people had recommended I go to see the ruins of Palenque, which would have required me to stick to Route 180. But I wasn't exactly thrilled about passing through the big city by bicycle. The ocean had always had a special appeal to me, so I decided to head up Route 187 without really knowing where I'd end up in the evening. The first town on my route was Comalcalco. While it took the rest of the morning and a good part of the afternoon to get there, the ride didn't seem long at all. I found an inexpensive place to eat that had great food. You can always tell a good restaurant by how many locals are eating there during off-peak hours. The waitress was a friendly young lady who was very helpful and knowledgeable about the route ahead. She told me that there were some good budget places to stay in the next town, Paraiso, which was only about 20 kilometers away. It seemed good to me. The ride to Paraiso went by really fast. Route 187 did not really go straight through town. And before I realized that, I had basically passed right by. I considered turning around to find accommodation, but just kept pedaling as I was contemplating. It felt good, and I had a tailwind. Why stop now? I had reached a point that some cyclists call the zone. It felt like I could just keep going forever and nothing hurt or even tired me. Fatigue no longer seemed to exist. I had superpowers. The magic lasted another 10 kilometers or so. That's where I found a turnoff that would most certainly lead me to the shore. Perhaps I'd be able to camp somewhere for free. I decided to turn off the main road onto the roughly paved secondary road. As soon as I changed direction, every bone in my body started aching. I had a full day of intense cycling behind me and was starting to feel it all at once. I wobbled my way down the road and eventually reached the beach. The place was beautiful, but there were some people fishing. I wasn't sure if it was a good idea to set up camp, especially since it was still broad daylight. After a while, I decided to backtrack toward the main road. Perhaps there was a campground or a small hotel nearby. When I had almost reached the highway, I noticed a middle-aged couple working on a property on the left side of the street. They recognized me from before when I had turned off the highway. Both were eager to talk to me. They were Pedro and Maria. It turned out that they had lived and worked in the United States for about 8 years. They were wondering if I was American. When I said I was from Canada, they at least knew right away where Toronto was. We chatted for a while and eventually I just had to ask if they knew of any good places to stay for the night, within my reach. Pedro looked at his wife first. When she smiled, he turned to me and said that I was welcome to stay right there. He was pointing at what appeared to be a garage. As it turned out, the building had been his parents' house, but they had passed away recently and the building was to be torn down to make room for a store. Before I knew it, Maria was sweeping the floor inside to make the place suitable for my air mattress. Pedro explained to me that he had just disconnected the power, but for tonight it was no problem to reconnect it so I'd have light. I was amazed by their willingness to help me out. I would have been happy with just a place to pitch my tent, but now I had a small house. I was set up within minutes and Pedro even gave me a key. They were going out to see relatives. Maria encouraged me to go down to the beach and told me about a nearby store in case I needed some food. She also told me to check back with them later if I was still up, when they'd come back. "Come over and visit," she said, pointing across the street. "Our house is over there." After they left, I went back to the beach, now without any luggage on the bike except a towel. This time, I had the place all to myself and went for a swim in the very calm water, which was actually part of a lagoon called Laguna de Chiltepec. When it was almost getting dark, I decided to return to my house. On the way back, I stopped at the store to get some snacks and a beer. Upon my return, the place was extremely quiet. I was grateful for the light as it allowed me to sit down on my mattress and study the map for the road ahead. There was really nothing else to do, so I almost nodded off. Then suddenly there was a knock at the door. It was Pedro. He invited me to come to his house, where Maria had some snacks and a glass of wine for each of us. I gladly accepted. Pedro and Maria had worked in Tennessee for about 8 years. They showed me photo albums of another life made up of company picnics, trips to the mountains, and their apartment building in the US. They reminded me of Miguel and his family in Ciudad Mendoza, as they too had saved their money to build a house where they had both grown up. Life in Tennessee had been good, and their employer had been like family. But after 8 years, they had been deported back to Mexico. Their stay in the US had started out legally with 1-year work permits. Their employer had liked them and tried to extend the permits, but had been unsuccessful. They had managed to stick around and work for 7 more years anyways. After their return to Mexico, both Pedro and Maria had put all they had into their new house. And it showed. They had a beautiful home and were now building their own store across the street. We chatted for a couple of hours and then parted ways. I could just leave the key in their mailbox, they said. Pedro was going to be up and gone to work early, and Maria was going to visit her mom. We said our goodbyes before I went across the street to sleep. Where was I going to end up the next day? Ciudad del Carmen was in the state of Campeche. Could I make it there in one day? I hadn't checked my email since La Venta. I would have to get to Campeche before I could do it again. I'll tell you about it next time. I hope you join me. And if you're not subscribed yet, I'd like you to do that. Luz especial